I watched the 19-year-old adjust his expensive sparring gloves, a smug grin plastered across his face as he promised to put me in the hospital in front of my neighbors. He thought I was just a mild-mannered suburban dad. He had absolutely no idea he was picking a fight with a former Tier 1 operator. For the last 6 years, my life had been wonderfully intentionally boring. After retiring from 14 years of active duty, including 3 deployments to Romania and a final stint leading a DevGru element, I just wanted quiet. I traded in my plate carrier and ballistic helmet for a pair of gardening gloves and a reliable lawn mower. My name is David Kessler. I work as an independent security consultant doing risk assessments for corporate data centers from a home office. I live in Oak Creek, a sleepy upper-middle-class suburb in Pennsylvania, with my 16-year-old daughter Emily. Oak Creek was the kind of place where the biggest scandal of the year was usually someone putting their recycling bins out a day early. That is until the Caldwell family bought the sprawling 3-acre estate directly next to my modest ranch home. Harry Caldwell was new money, having made a fortune liquidating bankrupt logistics companies. He drove a matte black G-Wagon, spoke at a volume reserved for busy airport terminals, and believed that his net worth bought him an exemption from common decency. But Harry wasn't the real problem. The real problem was his 19-year-old son, Trent. Trent was a walking cliché of unearned confidence. He was heavily muscled in that purely aesthetic gym bro way, drove a modified Audi that sounded like a gunfight every time it backfired, and was constantly clad in athletic gear from a highly expensive, heavily commercialized martial arts gym downtown called Apex Combat Systems. Within a week of moving in, Trent had hung a 200 pounds heavy bag from the massive oak tree near our shared property line. Every afternoon, I'd sit on my porch with a coffee, watching him absolutely brutalize this bag. He threw wild looping punches and spinning kicks that looked great in a movie but left him completely off balance. I could tell instantly that he had been trained for points and trophies, not for survival. His chin was always straight up in the air. His footwork was a mess, and he telegraphed his right hand a full second before he threw it. I didn't care. Let the kid play ninja. But then the bullying started. It began small. Trent started aggressively confronting delivery drivers who parked even an inch on their driveway. I watched him chest bump a 50-year-old UPS driver, flexing and shouting until the poor guy backed away with his hands up. Next, it was the neighborhood teenagers. Trent would block the sidewalk when the local kids rode by on their bikes, forcing them into the street just to assert dominance. The first time I interacted with Trent directly was in mid-July. Emily was out washing my truck in the driveway. She had the radio playing at a normal volume. Trent came strolling over from his yard, bare-chested, wearing his custom black belt with his name embroidered in gold. He didn't ask her to turn the music down. He walked right past her, reached into the open window of the truck, and snapped the volume knob off the radio. "My head hurts," Trent told her, his tone flat and menacing. "Keep it quiet." Emily froze, terrified. I was on the porch in a second. I didn't run. Running shows panic. I walked down the driveway with a measured, deliberate pace. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, keeping my voice deadpan, my hands loose and open at my sides, the universal de-escalation posture that also perfectly positions you for a preemptive strike. Trent turned to me, sizing me up. I'm 42, standing 6 feet 1 inch, but I dress in baggy flannel and jeans. I don't look like a guy who spent a decade kicking down doors in the dark. I look like a guy who goes to Home Depot on Sundays. "Your kid's music is annoying," Trent sneered, stepping into my personal space. He smelled heavily of cheap cologne and pre-workout powder. I handled it. "You got an issue with that, old man?" My heart rate didn't even flutter. When you've had a laser sight dance across your chest in a lightless compound in Hellman, an angry teenager in sweatpants doesn't exactly trigger your fight or flight response. "Trent, right?" I said softly. "I'm David. This is my property. If you ever touch my vehicle or step toward my daughter again, we're going to have a serious misunderstanding. Go home." Trent scoffed, puffing his chest out to try and intimidate me with his sheer mass. He leaned in, trying to catch my eye to establish dominance. I just looked at the bridge of his nose, my expression completely blank. When he realized I wasn't flinching, he backed off with a dismissive laugh. "Whatever, boomer. Watch your back," he muttered, walking away. I thought that was the end of it. I had used verbal judo, set a boundary, and let him save face. A professional operator knows that the best fight is the one that never happened. Unfortunately, Trent took my calm demeanor as cowardice. In his world, real men screamed, postured, and threw things. Because I didn't scream, he assumed I was weak. And in the mind of a bully, weakness is an invitation. By August, Trent's behavior escalated from obnoxious to completely unhinged. He had recently won a regional sparring tournament in a heavily regulated semi-contact division. Harry Caldwell threw a massive party to celebrate, complete with catered food and a live DJ that shook the windows of my house until 2 a.m. During the party, Trent strutted around the backyard, showing off his plastic trophy and bragging bragging loudly about how he was going to turn pro and dominate the MMA circuit. A few days after the party, things took a darker turn. Emily had a few friends over for a study group on our back patio. Trent decided this was the perfect audience. He brought his sparring gear out to the property line and started aggressively shadowboxing, throwing kicks that deliberately snapped the branches of my wife's prized lilac bushes. Every time the girls looked over, he would wink or make crude kissing noises. When Emily texted me from the patio saying she felt unsafe, something cold and clinical settled in my stomach. The dad in me was furious, but the operator in me took the wheel. I walked out the back door and stood at the property line. "Trent, stop breaking the bushes," I said evenly. He stopped, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his chest. His friends, a couple of lackeys from his gym, were lounging on lawn chairs behind him, laughing. "They're hanging over my dad's property," Trent lied. "They were clearly a foot inside my line. I'm just doing some landscaping, Dave. You want to stop me?" "I don't care about the bushes," I replied, locking eyes with him. "I care about you harassing my daughter. Take your workout somewhere else." Trent's face flushed red. He marched right up to the invisible boundary between our lawns. "Are you disrespecting me in front of my boys? Do you know who I am? I'm a black belt under Master Danvers. I could fold you in half, old man." To emphasize his point, Trent reached across the property line and grabbed the collar of my flannel shirt, balling it up in his massive fist. Muscle memory is a terrifying thing. Before my conscious brain could even register what was happening, my body reacted. I didn't strike him. I simply pivoted my hips, trapped his wrist against my chest with my left hand, and applied a sharp, agonizing pressure to the median nerve in his forearm with my right thumb, simultaneously rolling his elbow upward. It was a standard compliance hold applied in a fraction of a second. The physics of it forced Trent to his knees instantly. He let out a sharp, breathless yelp as his face hit the grass, completely immobilized. I let go immediately, stepping back and putting my hands up, feigning clumsiness. "Whoa, careful, Trent. Don't trip over the tree roots there," I said loudly, making sure his friends heard it. Trent scrambled to his feet, cradling his wrist, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. Because of how fast it happened and the angle of his friends, it truly looked like he had just stumbled and fallen. "You tripped me," he stammered, his face turning purple with rage. "Just watch your step," I said mildly, turning my back on him and walking back to my house. "Girls, let's move the study group inside." Turning your back on an aggressor is usually a terrible idea, but I knew his type. He was a predator who preyed on fear. By casually turning away, I short-circuited his ego. He didn't know how to process being dismissed so effortlessly. An hour later, there was a violent pounding at my front door. It was Harry Caldwell, Trent's father, red-faced and practically vibrating with anger. Trent stood behind him, looking sullen. "You laid hands on my son, Kessler," Harry screamed the second I opened the door. "He said you grabbed him and threw him to the ground." "Harry, your son grabbed my shirt." I stepped back and he lost his balance, I said calmly. "Check your own security cameras if you don't believe me." Harry jabbed a thick, manicured finger into my chest. "Trent is a champion fighter. He doesn't trip. You're lucky he didn't put you in a coma. You listen to me, you pathetic paper pusher. If you ever disrespect my kid again, I'll sue you into the dirt, and then I'll let him break your jaw. You stay away from my property." He stormed off, Trent shooting me a venomous, smug glare over his shoulder. They had rewritten the narrative. In Trent's mind, I had gotten lucky or used a cheap trick, and now his father had put me in my place. I closed the door and poured myself a glass of water inside. The escalation protocol in my brain was flashing red. A confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. It was only a matter of when and where. The climax arrived on Labor Day weekend during the annual Oak Creek cul-de-sac barbecue. It was a tradition where everyone dragged their grills out to the end of the street, set up folding tables, and shared food. Families were sitting on lawn chairs, kids were running through sprinklers, and the atmosphere was relaxed. I was standing near the cooler, chatting with a retired accountant named Arthur, who had lived there for 20 years, holding a plate of ribs. Emily was sitting with some neighbor girls on the curb a few yards away. Then the Caldwells arrived. Harry rolled up in his golf cart carrying a massive cooler of expensive imported beers while Trent walked behind him. Trent wasn't dressed for a neighborhood barbecue. He was wearing his gym's branded rash guard, tight grappling shorts, and carrying a gym bag. He had brought an audience, too. 3 guys from his dojo, all walking with that same exaggerated swagger. Almost immediately, Trent zeroed in on me. He walked straight through a group of children playing tag, not caring that he bumped into a little girl. He marched up to where I was standing, dropping his gym bag onto the asphalt with a heavy thud. The casual chatter of the neighborhood began to die down. People sensed the tension. "Hey Dave," Trent said loudly. His voice was projected, designed to carry over the music. "We never finished our conversation from last week." "Trent," I said neutrally, taking a bite of a rib. "It's a block party. Go eat a burger." "Dave, I don't eat garbage," he spat. He unzipped his bag and pulled out a pair of 4-ounce MMA gloves. He tossed one pair at my feet. "You got real lucky the other day, tripping me when I wasn't looking. You think you're tough in front of your little girl. Put the gloves on." The music seemed to completely stop. A heavy, uncomfortable silence blanketed the street. Dozens of neighbors turned to look. I saw Emily stand up, her face pale. Harry Caldwell was standing by his golf cart, sipping a beer, wearing a smug smile, entirely approving of his son's behavior. "This is ridiculous," said Mr. Peterson, the neighborhood association president, stepping forward nervously. "This is a family event." "Shut up, Peterson," Trent snapped, not breaking eye contact with me. "This guy assaulted me last week on my own property. I'm calling him out right here. Let's see how tough you are on the grass. One-on-one. No cheap tricks." He was backing me into a corner. If I walked away, he would relentlessly terrorize my daughter and me, believing I was entirely submissive. If I called the police, he would likely get a slap on the wrist, and the harassment would turn covert and much more dangerous. He was a dog chasing a car, and he had no idea what he was about to catch. I put my paper plate down on the cooler. I looked at Emily and gave her a slow, reassuring nod. Then I looked back at Trent. "You really want to do this?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, shedding the polite suburban veneer. "Here now, scared," Trent taunted, strapping the Velcro of his gloves with his teeth. His friends chuckled. "I'm going to make you bleed in front of your kid, Dave." "Okay," I said quietly. I didn't pick up the gloves he threw at my feet. Gloves protect your hands from breaking on a skull. They aren't meant for the other guy's protection. I didn't need them. I took off my flannel overshirt, leaving me in a plain gray t-shirt, and walked slowly toward the center of the large grassy common area between the driveways. Harry laughed loudly. "Call an ambulance for him now, Trent. Show this nobody what a real man looks like." I stopped in the middle of the grass and turned to face Trent. I assumed a very relaxed, baited stance. My hands weren't up in a traditional boxing guard. They hung loose at chest level. To a trained eye, it was a modified Krav Maga/CQC readiness stance designed for lethal efficiency. To Trent, it just looked like I didn't know what I was doing. "Rules?" Trent asked mockingly as he bounced on his toes, throwing fast, showy combinations at the air. "Just one," I said, my eyes tracking the micro-movements of his shoulders and hips. "When you're ready to quit, you stay on the ground." Trent didn't wait for a bell. In his world, aggression was the ultimate currency, and he intended to spend it all in the first 10 seconds. He let out a sharp, guttural exhale, a manufactured grunt he'd likely heard in action movies, and lunged forward. He led with a classic heavily telegraphed 1-2 combination. A stiff left jab followed by a looping right cross aimed directly at my jaw. To the untrained eye of the neighborhood spectators, it looked terrifyingly fast. To someone who had spent their entire adult life drilling close-quarters combat against insurgents who actually wanted to end their life, it looked like it was happening in slow motion. Combat is entirely about the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Trent's loop was jammed by arrogance. He expected me to flinch, retreat, or raise my hands in a panicked guard, which would leave my ribs exposed for a follow-up roundhouse kick. I didn't retreat. I stepped forward and slightly to the left, slipping directly inside the arc of his right hand. The punch sailed harmlessly over my shoulder, displacing nothing but air. Before his brain could process that his fist had hit empty space, I used the momentum of his own forward charge against him. I didn't strike him. I didn't need to yet. I simply placed my open right hand on his triceps and my left hand on his chest, using a fluid circular motion to redirect his center of gravity. I essentially helped him go exactly where he wanted to go, just a lot faster than he intended. Trent stumbled past me, his boots tearing up chunks of the freshly mowed grass as he desperately windmilled his arms to avoid falling on his face. He caught his balance just before hitting the asphalt of the street, spinning around with a look of utter bewilderment. The crowd of neighbors was dead silent. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, stood frozen with a half-eaten hot dog in his hand. Emily was watching from the curb, her posture tense, but her eyes locked on me with quiet trust. "Lucky step, old man," Trent barked, his face flushing crimson as his friend snickered nervously. He reset his stance, bouncing higher on his toes. This time, the adrenaline was hitting his system. Not the good kind that sharpens your senses, but the toxic, ego-driven kind that floods your vision and makes your limbs feel heavy. He decided to abandon boxing and go for his bread and butter, flashy kicks. He stepped in, feinted a jab, and launched a massive spinning back kick aimed at my midsection. In a controlled tournament on a padded mat against a compliant opponent, it would have scored maximum points. On uneven grass against a Tier 1 operator, it was tactical suicide. As he turned his back to me to execute the spin, he committed the cardinal sin of fighting. He took his eyes off his target. I didn't block the kick. I simply stepped in, completely closing the distance before his leg could fully extend. As his heel swung around, catching nothing but the hem of my t-shirt, I stepped deeply into his pivot leg. My right boot hooked sharply behind his left ankle, and I delivered a rigid, open-handed shove to his shoulder blade. Physics took over instantly. Both of Trent's feet left the ground simultaneously, and he went completely horizontal. The sound of his back slamming into the hard-packed earth was a hollow, echoing thud that caused several people in the crowd to wince. All the air was forcefully expelled from his lungs in a ragged gasp. He lay there for a second, his eyes wide with shock, struggling to pull oxygen back into his diaphragm. I stood over him, my hands still relaxed at my sides, my breathing completely even. "You're on the ground, Trent," I said, my voice barely above a conversational whisper, though in the dead silence of the block party, everyone heard it. "That means we're done. Get up, Trent." "Break a leg, Harry," roared from the sidelines, spraying beer foam as he waved his arms frantically. "Stop playing with him and end it." Harry's voice pierced Trent's humiliation, replacing it with a desperate, blinding rage. Trent rolled backward, scrambling to his feet. His technique was completely gone now. The martial arts training he had paid thousands of dollars for evaporated under the heat of real-world embarrassment. He wasn't a calculated fighter anymore. He was a terrified, angry kid throwing a tantrum. He rushed me again, abandoning all technique for a crude, wild tackle, aiming to wrap me up and take me to the ground where he thought his size would give him the advantage. He lowered his head and charged, wrapping his thick arms around my waist. This was his final mistake. Ground fighting in a street encounter is highly discouraged in military operations unless absolutely necessary. But if forced into it, the goal is immediate neutralization. As Trent wrapped his arms around my waist, trying to heave me upward, I widened my base, dropping my hips to lower my center of gravity, a standard wrestling sprawl. His upward momentum halted abruptly, like he had tried to deadlift a boulder bolted to the floor. Before he could adjust, I reached over his back with my right arm, sliding my forearm tight against the side of his neck, locking it in place with my left hand. I didn't apply a full choke. I didn't want to kill him or send him to the hospital. Instead, I applied a very specific, agonizing pressure downward on his cervical spine while simultaneously driving my body weight directly into his shoulders. Trent was instantly pinned beneath my weight, bent over at a 90-degree angle, his face shoved forcefully into the dirt. His arms flailed uselessly around my legs as panic finally overrode his anger. "Breathe, Trent," I instructed coldly, leaning my mouth near his ear. "Look at the dirt. Feel how heavy you are right now. Your muscles need oxygen, and you're burning it all on panic. You don't know what you're doing. You are out of your depth. Let me go," he croaked, his voice muffled by the grass. "I'll let you go when you tap," I said, maintaining the crushing top pressure. "Tap the ground, Trent. Show your father what losing looks like. Do it." For 5 agonizing seconds, Trent struggled, his boots digging trenches in the lawn as he tried to heave me off. But leverage is a master no muscle can defeat. Finally, sobbing with a mixture of pain, exhaustion, and utter humiliation, his hand weakly slapped the grass 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I released the pressure immediately and stepped back, re-establishing my distance. Trent collapsed onto his back, coughing violently, his chest heaving as he stared up at the sky. He was covered in grass stains, his expensive grappling shorts smeared with mud, his ego completely shattered into microscopic pieces. He had been thoroughly dismantled in less than 90 seconds, and I hadn't thrown a single punch. The silence of the neighborhood was deafening. No one cheered. No one clapped. They just stared, processing the reality that the quiet, flannel-wearing dad had just neutralized a 200-pound competitive martial artist without breaking a sweat. Then the silence was shattered. "You son of a bitch!" Harry Caldwell shrieked, throwing his beer can onto the street and storming toward me. He was practically vibrating with rage, his face a deep, dangerous shade of purple. "You assaulted my boy. I saw you. You used illegal moves. I turned to face Harry, my posture immediately shifting. Dealing with Trent was an exercise in physical control. Dealing with Harry required psychological dominance. Take another step toward me, Harry, and I will view it as a threat to my safety, I said. My voice was no longer the polite neighbor. It was the voice that had commanded operators in hostile territory. It cut through the summer air like a whip. Harry froze, his instincts warning him of the danger his ego was trying to ignore. He stopped 5 feet away, his fists clenched, chest heaving. You're going to jail, Harry screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. I'm calling the police right now. I have the best lawyers in the state on retainer. I'm going to take your house, your savings, and everything you own. Call them, I said calmly, crossing my arms over my chest. Let's get everything on the record. Within 10 minutes, the flashing lights of 2 Oak Creek police cruisers reflected off the vinyl siding of the houses on our street. The officers who stepped out, a veteran sergeant named Keller and a younger patrol officer named Mitchell, looked confused as they surveyed the scene. Instead of a bloody brawl, they found a neighborhood barbecue completely halted with 20 people quietly waiting, a teenager sitting in the grass looking devastated, and 2 men standing on opposite sides of a lawn. Harry didn't waste a second. He immediately rushed Sergeant Keller, launching into a frantic, entirely fabricated narrative. Officers, thank God you're here. This maniac, Harry pointed at me, just violently assaulted my teenage son. My son was just standing here, and this psychopath attacked him, choked him, and threw him to the ground. I want him arrested for aggravated assault right now. Sergeant Keller held up a hand, looking exhausted by the volume of Harry's voice. He glanced over at Trent, who was still sitting on the grass, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Then Keller looked at me. Is this true, sir? Keller asked, walking over with his notepad out. Before I could say a word, Henry, the retired accountant who had been standing near the cooler, stepped forward. That is a complete lie, officer, Henry said firmly. Harry whipped around. Shut up, Henry. Mind your own business.